Hi, folks. So today I want to give you a brief introduction to the thought of Audre Lorde, and I'm going to draw on this book, Sister Outsider. I'm mostly going to focus on one essay, The Erotic is Power, but I might make reference to a couple of other essays as well. But this seems to me, her essay, The Erotic is Power, seems to me to be an excellent way to kind of complete the study we've been engaged in so far, initially with Simone de Beauvoir and then with John Berger. With de Beauvoir, remember we started talking about the notion of femininity and the idea that the feminine, and sort of what it is to be a woman, is a product of society as opposed to something naturally occurring. And so we've especially then been thinking about what that product woman is, or what the cultural construction of femininity is. And we looked at that especially through chapter 3 of John Berger's book Ways of Seeing. And we saw that the sort of cultural model of femininity is very inhibiting for women. It's a model that treats women as objects and as essentially passive, and other things. We said a fair bit about it. And then Berger also went on to say, well, what is the notion of masculine that corresponds to that? And so, one of the things that we were really seeing is that feminine and masculine are not sort of naturally occurring properties of women and men, respectively, but are rather basically socially defined roles that people perform. I mean, they're very real in the sense that we take them on as our identities, but we are making our identities out of performing a sort of prescribed role rather than just enacting some naturally given trait. So they're roles, but they're also paired, right? In other words, we saw that the way the notion of the feminine is being construed is intimately connected with the way the notion of being masculine is being construed, and those two form a system. And a system, unfortunately, that mostly puts the man in the position of power and the woman in the position of subordination. So Audre Lorde now wants to revisit that question of women and women's sexuality. And in light of that critique of the feminine, she's basically going to ask, how should women's sexuality be defined, or how should women define their sexuality, if not on that model of the feminine as prescribed by the world of male domination. So that's really what she's after. But before really talking directly about that issue, there's something else she does that we should talk about, and that is she goes a little deeper into this theme of the masculine that we were bringing out in Berger, and looks at how the notion of masculinity is not only a sort of role relevant to the sort of obvious sexual sphere, but is itself part of a whole system of how to think about the world and so on. So that's what I want to do first. I want to talk about a little bit more about the male system of power, of which she is critical, and on the basis of that lead into what she wants to say about the new sort of feminine sense of the erotic. So Lorde says on page 53, the superficially erotic has been encouraged as a sign of female inferiority. And she says this has been fashioned within the context of male models of power. So she refers to the superficially erotic. What she wants to argue ultimately is that obviously there is a much deeper sense of the erotic, but that what we have been encouraged to think of as the erotic is actually something kind of trivial, and especially something that we can remove we can treat as removed from all the important domains of our life. And this is then especially the kind of thing that is celebrated in pornography. Right? And as she says about pornography, pornography is a direct denial of the power of the erotic. Right? So in that sense, it is that which treats the erotic as something relatively superficial. And as she says, in that case, the erotic has been misnamed by men and used against women. So the model that we're used to is the idea then that sex is, a sort of, maybe it's like dessert or something. Like it's a fun little thing you might do on the side. It's entertaining. It's not part of the central things in life. It's part of partying, and it's it's kind of like getting drunk. It's about getting some nice sensations or something like that. It's about immediate bodily pleasures and the exciting thrill of the moment. I don't mean to deny that any of those things can be true of sex, but she's saying that pornography makes it seem like that's all that sex could be. So as she says on page 55, we're taught to separate the erotic demand from most vital areas of our lives other than sex. And furthermore, this is at the bottom of 58 and the top of 59. She wants to say, in reality, sex has a lot, or the erotic has a lot to do with our need to share, right? So she says the need for sharing deep feeling is a human need. But she says then within the European American tradition, that need is satisfied by certain proscribed erotic comings together. Proscribed meaning things that are sort of marked out as sort of off limits or something like that, right? And she says these occasions are almost always characterized by a simultaneous looking away, a pretense of calling them something else. And this misnaming of the need and the deed give rise to that distortion which results in pornography and obscenity, which is the abuse of feeling. So basically what she's saying then is that sex is, or the erotic and sexuality, let's say, really is a very big deal. But we're made to think it's a small deal, and it's sort of played up as kind of a naughty thing, right? And so we feel awkward about talking about it, right? And we think it's something we can't really speak about directly, and we shouldn't admit that we're doing it in polite company and so on. But that also means that when we do it, we sort of feel like we're cheating, and we actually feel kind of dirty. Now, we might like feeling kind of dirty too, but notice that it's got that notion then kind of built into it, right? That there's something kind of improper about it. In a certain sense, something kind of bad about it, right? So she's saying that's a model of sex. Like just as we were saying before, there's a model of the feminine and a model of the masculine that aren't naturally occurring, but are these sort of social constructions. Well, she's saying that's a model of sex that's socially constructed too, and it goes along with that model. But notice she says that's related to male models of power. As we've already talked about, that whole model, we said this with Berger and de Beauvoir, is about a situation that puts the judging, strong, independent man in power of this passive, dependent woman whose role is really to look nice and entertain him and serve him. So it's related to male models of power in that sense. But notice she said this thing about the European American tradition. Right? What she's getting at there is this is part of a bigger cultural world that has more going on in it than just a view about sex. The European American world she's talking about, that's the dominant world of global power, global colonialism since the 1600s, and global power in our own day, right? The European world is the world that has kind of defined what everybody else on the planet has to answer to. And the European American world itself is the powerful part of the world. And so this notion of the male models of power goes along with another sort of political notion of power that is wrapped up with the global domination of the globe by Europe and America. And so I want to mention a couple other things she says then in there too, right? In light of that, she says, I mentioned pornography as sort of a place where you're saying, okay, here's where you see how sex itself gets kind of misportrayed. But then she says, again, I read this line already on 55, we are taught to separate the erotic demand from most vital areas of our lives other than sex. And then she goes on to say, okay, the lack of concern for the erotic root and satisfactions of our work, right? She's saying our work has an erotic root and it gives us erotic satisfaction, or at least that's what work should do. She says that the lack of concern for the erotic root and satisfactions of our work is felt in our dissatisfaction from so much of what we do. So she wants to say here, this is already sort of stepping into a richer account of the erotic, but here's just still picking up on the critical side. She's saying our engagement in the world should be fulfilling. We should be able to go do our things and be happy about it. And yet we live in a world where what we spend our lives doing, our jobs or whatever, our work, tends to be sterile and frustrating and leaves us unhappy. And so she's saying that this sort of European American tradition is also a world that has taken the very notion of work and sort of misrepresented what that is too, by misrepresentatively taking Eros out of all those other areas of our lives, right? It's misrepresented Eros. It's also misrepresented those other areas of our lives and stripped them of something very important. So the world we live in treats work as something tedious and difficult, just a thing you got to do. And so we spend our lives working and we're not very happy about it. Right? The things we put most of our effort and energy into are mostly working for someone else, serving someone else, and thinking of it as a kind of drudgery we have to engage in for the sake of, being able to have a little bit of time for ourselves, at the end of the day or whatever. Right? Anyway, let's go on. She says, just the next paragraph, the first line, she refers to the principal horror of any system which defines the good in terms of profit rather than in terms of human need. Well, she's saying that is what this European American system has done. It's a world built around profit, which is essentially the world of capitalist economics. Right? So she's saying we live in a world that it's almost turned into a religion, the idea of making money. It's like we've been led to believe that's what the world is about. That's what life is about. And consequently, when we see people doing that, we don't think they're evil, awful people. We think they're successful. And when we try to think how we would better our own lives, we try to do that. We try to make money, right? We've got a world that has defined the good in terms of profit, but not in terms of human need. Right? And that, again, sits very well with what we were talking about in Berger, with his analysis of what he calls publicity, or what I was calling advertising, right? Which is the way this very same economic system depends on consumers, depends on making products that people are going to buy, from which the company that makes them is going to make a lot of profit. So, some fairly rich person is going to own a company that makes a product, and they're going to hire people to run the machines to make those products. Then they're going to sell the products. They're going to make some money from those products, and they're going to pay those people who work for them much less than what they get from selling those products. And the difference between what they sell them for and what they have to pay out to the workers and the maintenance of the machines is going to be profit. And they're going to make a lot of profit. And that's what this system is built around. It's built around figuring out a way that you can get other people to do the work that allows you to get rich off their work without you paying them very much. Right? So that's the system we're in. And she's linking then that notion of the male gaze in sexuality with this notion of the profit-oriented sort of capitalist society. So, I'm not going to go into an in-depth analysis of capitalism here. You could do that elsewhere. What I really want you to see, though, is just the point that she's making, that this way of construing sexuality, which is itself built on a model of the relations of men and women where men dominate, that way of construing sexuality isn't just about sex. It's also a model that's built into our whole way of thinking about life, especially pronounced in the way we think about work. And there, it's intimately linked with the values that serve the capitalist economic system that depends on consumerism and wage labor to allow a relatively small group of people to become incredibly rich. And so she's saying that whole political and economic system is, part of the same story as the story of that male gaze in sexuality. So, criticizing that model of the understanding of sexual roles isn't really separate from taking up a critical stance on a whole political and economic and social system. So in that context, then, I want to turn now to her redefinition of the erotic and the redefinition of the female, or what it is or could be to be a woman. Right? And so she begins, this is on page 53, by saying, the erotic is a resource within each of us that lies in a deeply female and spiritual plane. So, she's attaching it to the notion of the female, like she's trying to say we're going to revisit that question of what it is to be a woman. And she's saying the erotic, as she's about to define it, that's where we should be understanding the possibilities for what it is to be a woman. And I think that remark that I just read in passing about pornography is a helpful way to start, because she said that what's wrong with pornography is that it emphasizes sensation without feeling. Right? And I think what she means by that is, it emphasizes, things that immediately feel nice, sensation in that sense of, pleasurable stimulation. By feeling, I think she means something more like what we would commonly call passion, deep feeling, deep commitment, deep engagement with something, an engagement with something that moves you in the deepest parts of your being. That's what she means by feeling. And so that's how she's understanding the erotic. She's understanding it as passion. And so she's saying that's really the thing about us, that we're kind of beings that have the capacity to be passionate about things, to feel about things in the world, that kind of almost lustful desire that we commonly associate with, some kind of, great, sexual excitement in a narrower sense. But she's saying, you can feel that kind of deep draw to something about all kinds of things in your life. And she says, those feelings are in a way really defining what's going on in you, sort of where you're coming from. And so the erotic realm should be about speaking to that, speaking to what's welling up in you as an individual being, that is that thing that you're bursting to experience and to express. Right? And so she says quite a bit about this. So on page 54, for example, she says, the erotic is an internal sense of satisfaction to which, once we have experienced it, we know we can aspire. Right? There's something in you, not coming from something somebody else told you, something in you that says, that's what I want. And in situations where that has actually been addressed, You know what it's actually like to feel satisfied. And what happens when you've had that experience is you can then demand that of the other dimensions of your life. You can say, oh, I want my life to bring me that kind of feeling. Right? And she says, having experienced the fullness of this depth of feeling and recognizing its power, in honor and self-respect, we can require no less of ourselves. Right? So notice the interesting sort of two sides to this. Right? We can demand of our lives, and I can sort of point outward to the world, we can demand of our lives that our lives allow us to feel this satisfaction. Right? But, and that's right, but it's also about ourselves, because it's putting the pressure on us to say, oh, I have to live in a way that makes my life take that form. Right? So finding these roots of desire and hence satisfaction in ourselves tells us what we want and need the world to be. But it also tells us that's what we have to measure up to. We have to become people who live that way. And so she says right after that then, it's never easy to demand the most from ourselves, or from our lives, or from our work. But that's what it really means to be erotic. It's to feel a passion. And when you feel a passion, it's like, oh, I guess I got to do that, right? Feeling a passion puts pressure on you, not necessarily undesirable pressure, but pressure nonetheless, puts pressure on you to follow that passion, to do what it takes to fulfill that passion. You know, you might think of that in the context of music. If you really love music, you might be passionate about it, but that means you got to put hours into it every day, which probably you'll want to do if you're passionate about it, right? But the point is, you got to put a lot into things to allow yourself to follow your passion, right? So as she says, it's never easy to demand the most from ourselves, from our lives, from our work. To encourage excellence is to go beyond the encouraged mediocrity of our society, right? And so we need to encourage excellence in ourselves. That's hard in a certain way just because we have to do it, but it also means we actually have to fight against, in a way, the social expectations, which really encourage us not to do that. Encourage us to conform and just sort of be an average person, be sort of mediocre. And so then she goes on, this internal requirement toward excellence, which we learn from the erotic. Well, I think that's a very, very nice way to put it, right? The erotic, as she's understanding it here, is an internal requirement towards excellence. It's not somebody else coming to you and saying, this is what you have to do to be good. It's your own inner nature saying to you, this is what you got to do, right? It's something inside you that's pushing you to be your best self, right? And as she says, this must not be misconstrued as demanding the impossible from ourselves or from others. If taking it up that way is a matter of incapacitating everyone. But she says, the erotic is not a question of what we do. Like, it's not, again, a kind of external quantitative measure of a level of achievement. Rather, it's a question of how acutely and fully we can feel in the doing. Right? So that's what it's really about. Like, she's saying the erotic, being erotic, is really about being there with your life, being there with your actions, right? It's about being fully committed to what you're doing, not because you're saying, oh yeah, okay, I give up, I'm going to do what somebody else tells me. It means being fully committed in the sense that you are, in the strongest sense, kind of saying yes to yourself and going along with that, bringing the most out of yourself for the sake of being yourself. And in fact, that word yes is relevant. She says a little bit later, we have been raised to fear the yes within ourselves, our deepest cravings, right? So that's what she really wants to say. She wants to say that to everybody. She especially wants to say it to women. Women because women have so especially been told, you shouldn't be anything. You should be a pretty little model for someone else's desire. You shouldn't even be a subject. You should just be an object, right? And so she's saying true erotic feeling is the sense that, yeah, I'm going to be me. I'm going to, make my life answer to passions that I feel. And that's a pretty big saying yes. And it would be hard to be more opposed to the model of the feminine or the feminine woman as the, pretty petite little porcelain model, basically, right? So, that's the main thing that I want to say about it, is just to bring out this powerful notion of the erotic as she says, this sort of internal propulsion towards excellence, and this thing that really calls upon you to say yes to yourself. And she says, that's a resource, right? Remember that first line that she said in the book? She said, the erotic is a resource within each of us. Like, this is the thing, in other words, if you want to be happy in your life, that's what you got to turn to. Money's not going to make you happy. Fame's not going to make you happy. This is going to make you happy, right? Money and fame are things that are precisely going to allow you to feel like you're winning in that game of the male models of power. A game in which, to participate in it, you actually have to have already pretty much stripped yourself of the possibility of being happy. To be happy, you actually have to oppose that system, and on the contrary, find the sort of the roots of your own point of connection with the world, and give yourself over to that, which is right, but also work at allowing that thing to develop, right? So that's the big idea, and I want to just make then one last point about that, and that goes back then to that notion of the critique of male models of power, right? Because she says, having this feeling, it's talking about saying yes to yourself, but again, when you say yourself, be careful not to just bring back the problems of that male model of power, right? Saying yes to yourself doesn't mean saying, okay, I'm going to be the powerful individual who's going to dominate everybody else. That's the exact opposite of what she's saying. Saying yes to yourself is going to be saying yes to your deepest human needs. But as she says, the need for sharing deep feeling is a human need, right? When you cultivate these things, what it naturally leads you to want to do actually is connect with people. And so the erotic side of our being, she says, is actually the thing that leads us into, engagement with others, not detached observation of others where we use them as objects, but getting wrapped up with others in cooperative engagements towards, shared pursuits and fulfilling our deep drives and desires and commitments and so on. And remember, again, this is as she says, it's built on that critique of the male model of power, which itself is part of a whole cultural system that's, intimately connected with European capitalism and global domination and all the rest, right? And so it also means engaging with your deep feelings and saying yes to that goes hand in hand with developing a critical perspective on those other political dimensions. And so, as she says, our acts against oppression become integral with self, right? Being politically engaged is not separate from being committed to allowing your own deepest passions to emerge. And so here again she says, saying yes to the erotic goes hand in hand with, in as much as it directs you towards sharing with others, and in as much as it's recognizing the problem with that male model of power, it goes hand in hand with developing a sense of solidarity with other people who face related struggles. And so the commitment to the erotic dimension of yourself should naturally lead you to bond with other people. And, especially other people who are oppressed by and opposed to that situation. So it encourages solidarity between women and racially oppressed groups and people who are, labeled as disabled and excluded from, normal recognition in society, right? And so, she says, talking about her own stance, she says, as a black lesbian feminist, right? And I just want to emphasize those words, right? She's saying she sees her own identity as integrated with the world of women's struggles, feminism, with the world of struggles against heterosexism by her by her defining herself as lesbian. She defines herself as black and therefore identifies herself with a whole world of people who are oppressed by that, white, Eurocentric political world, right? So her commitment to herself also then leads her to experience the integral connection between who she is and these other groups that she's a part of and with whom she can feel and forge a sense of identity. So I just want to leave it there, but I really wanted to bring out then just that idea of the erotic as this deep commitment to what is deepest in you, but to see how that also is not about isolating you in your own, private fantasy of domination, but it's precisely about bringing you into meaningful connection with all kinds of other people. And all of that in the context of developing a politically critical perspective on contemporary Western culture.